I was going to ask, how does Australia support the right of Australian citizens to protest and express their concerns about the Israel-Gaza conflict, even if it includes criticism of Israeli policies?
James?
Of course we believe in freedom of speech, and Australians should be able to protest and should be able to disagree with our government and disagree with governments overseas. But I do think there is a line that should not be crossed in relation to what people can say, and that is inciting hate. And what we saw on the steps of the Sydney Opera House last week, and I know people are going to get triggered, but people need to know what was said. We had people saying, "Gas the Jews." That is offensive on so many levels, and I think with freedom of speech comes a responsibility to ensure how you exercise that freedom of speech. And I say shame on everyone and anyone who was at that protest and allowed those people to utter those disgusting phrases.
I want to bring in you, Patrick, in terms of the right, which is essentially you're asking to have protests criticising Israeli government policies. That's not... You're drawing this distinction between protesting against a government's policies and anti-Semitism, right?
Mm-hmm. No place for anti-Semitism in Australia. I would hope everyone agrees with that. There is a really big place in Australia for a free-flowing democratic discussion, but I just call on people not to abuse those democratic freedoms. And I think that's basically when James talks about the line, that's what we've seen is people take a democratic freedom and use it in a way that they abuse those freedoms. We have protests in this country where people protest against the Australian government, which I'm a part of. Might not like that, but I'm really grateful to live in a country where that is something that can happen. I myself, from time to time, when I was a bit younger, have attended protests as well about things I feel passionately about. I'd encourage people to find those ways that they're comfortable using their democratic voice, but to never, ever abuse it or use it to speak hatefully about other human beings.
Pani, do you feel like you're supported to protest on these issues?
I do think, yeah, but my question was really focusing on media representation because I feel like it's a very one-sided thing.
Well, that's a question for you, Patricia.
No, it's not. I don't take questions.
I think it is a kind of a one-sided representation because if we're going to talk about this conflict, we should take into consideration what Palestinians have gone through. And although I don't support the violence and the gruesome approach, I do think that they are approaching from a point of oppression.
Dee?
Yeah, look, I think that's absolutely right, and I think we had peaceful protests on the weekend by Palestinians, and that was great. I think what's happening, though, is you get the extremists on both sides who see these protests and they almost co-opt them for their own agendas, and which is really unfortunate because, you know, in Australia we've always had a really proud history of the right to protest. Even if it's not something particularly popular, that's okay. You should still have the right to be able to do that. But, you know, as we've said, without inciting violence or hate speech or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia.